This season of the Breech Birth podcast will be a little different. I'll be speaking with researchers, midwives, and obstetricians working within the breech birth space, bringing additional perspectives, knowledge, and evidence-based research to you, the listener. I hope you enjoy these conversations. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sasha. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. So before we jump into your questions, would you like to just share a bit about yourself, your background, what you've been doing, particularly around the spinning baby side of things and working with women with breech babies?
So as far as spinning babies goes, that was probably an introduction into bodywork and breech. And at this point, I work out of a business called ReStory Birthwork. And we have purchased from spinning babies Breech Basics. And so that is now part of our business. We also have something called the Breech Release. It's a process, I believe you could call it. It's also a book, and it's a book that I wrote with Jamie Mose, and it is about not just turning babies, it's about releasing breech from the cultural hold. And this includes a lot of bodywork centered. It brings 4 paths together of validation, like starting with breech with this place of validation versus this need to fix or change. And the second pathway of that is doing body work, and the third is positioning, and then gravity and movement. A lot of the work with that is a longer conversation, of course, than just an introduction, but that is a lot of the work I'm doing. I probably get anywhere from 1 to 5 calls a week of people who are breech, and a lot of them are in shock and, their birth plan is threatened. Some of them are just needing help navigating breech. So that's really what I see my role as. I also am someone who's taught breech at the local midwifery school I taught there for about 12, 13 years. And now I teach Breech Basics. I travel and teach that, really focusing on the pelvic level solutions, which is a little different. But of course, all of this began because I was a breech mom.
Yeah, which we get to hear your story after our questions. Excited. So you do work alongside a doctor at times to support breech birth?
Yeah. I tend some breeches here and have traveled to Mexico. I've traveled to Pennsylvania to do breech. Of course, here in San Diego, I've been blessed to work with various doctors who have come down here and with families in different situations.
Yeah. So one of the questions I had for you off the top of your head, how many breech babies have you attended?
I think I'm in the lower amount for a lot of people in my position, but over about 30, somewhere between 30 and 40 breech I've been to. Yeah, I think that one of the things, I'm in California in the United States that has restrictions for breech is, to get closer to do breech, you have to work harder and really put yourself out there in a different way. And I've been really blessed doing body work for breech. I started this journey really looking for breech birth skills and really didn't look to do body work or to try to help babies flip or turn. But the thing about breech pregnancy is, in case people didn't realize, it's also connected to breech birth, in one way or the other. And so really getting closer to understanding more about fetal positioning, the nuances of that, which of course influences breech descent.
Yeah. What's the most common breech presentation that you've witnessed in your practice?
I believe that it would be a frank breech position. It's here, I have my little doll next to me. It's, when the baby's like flipped up, like that. And then of course I've seen some complete breech as well. So
yeah. Beautiful. And what's the most unusual situation that you've witnessed at a breech birth?
I think the most unusual situation was a birth that was a surprise breech in a birth center. And I happened to be about 5 minutes from this birth center picking up Gail Tolley, who's the owner of Spinning Babies. She was getting in my car and I got this call and I said, "You're not going to believe this. Guess where we're going?" And we walked in as the baby was emerging. And this baby was being born in the tub, and the mother was in hands and knees, and the baby was coming out transverse. And the bum transverse, not like this, but transverse like this. In your world, it's called lateral. But in
Yeah.
my world, it's
I'm like,
it's
what?
nonsensical over here in the US. But in this, baby was coming out transverse like this. And I'm sorry, it was like this while she was in hands and knees. So I was where you are, and this is what I could see. And I was like, wow, I wonder if this baby, we're going to need to help this baby out. And the arms came out in the same positions. The baby didn't rotate. But what was interesting about this is that the head didn't come out. And so we went inside. I went inside up in here with the other hand because I can't do it right now on the thing. And there was no space between the ear and the sacrum. And the baby's head was on facing the other direction from its body.
Right. So
And
completely
so
twisted.
it was twisted and so then had to help the baby move its head back, and then it was very tight. Gail helped me out, and what we decided is that the sacral bones, like S5, had come in and had impacted the ability for the head to descend. So I think that was the most unusual. We had to be very creative and help flex the head while using fundal pressure to get the baby out. Baby was fine. I gave baby a few breaths and moved to the bed, right? We had stood up in the tub at the time. It was an inconvenient tub.
Well, perfect timing to get that call when you're 5 minutes away.
Yeah, yeah. And I doubt I'm going to come across that same situation again, but it was disorienting to reach inside and not find space where you usually find space,
Mm,
and then have less space and it not be the face of the baby, right?
yes. Yeah.
So, these are the places where midwives may not have been given the exact instructions, but you figure out what to do when you don't know what to do.
Yeah. You have to. Got to work it
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Fascinating story. Have you encountered any barriers in your practice in relation to breech birth as a practitioner? If so, what were these?
Well, isn't breech just a big barrier sometimes in general? Like, I was mentioning the cultural hold on breech, and the cultural hold, whether it's legal or illegal, I love breech in the sense that it is an acute representation of birth. And, there's these quotes that come to mind, and Hermine Hayes Klein calls it the canary in the coal mine. And Gail says, where goes breech, there goes birth. And I really believe that the skills of breech are not just about breech, they're about head down babies. But the cultural hold right now is pretty heavy. And I think that I've been really blessed and lucky to have had access. I had met Gail Tully from Spinning Babies at a workshop in 2012. I had met her at a Spinning Babies workshop and a Resolving Shoulder Dystocia one before, but really where we came into connection was in 2012. We went to a workshop where a midwife, Deanne Davis and Peter O'Neill, were teaching breech. I was there in the audience, and Gail was as a student as well as helping out with different simulations afterwards. But it's like I had to seek out that information. And because I came in connection with her, I was really privy to a lot of information about breech that I don't think other people were.
Mm,
I was in real time hearing about, before it was published, Jane Evans writing about the cardinal movements of breech birth, and before it was published in mid-years. And I was able to really have someone else mentor from Gail in processing more about lack of rotation to sacral anterior. I was able to really just get more access to information at a time that it just wasn't as available as it is today. So I think I've been unique in some of the problems of acquisition of skills and understanding of the relationship of the baby and into the maternal anatomy and as it spirals through the pelvis. I was very lucky that way. But it still doesn't make it easy to go outside of boundaries that are set. But I mean, I've been teaching breech for a while, and I think that also gains confidence from students who've become midwives. So if they're not sure if it's a face presentation or a breech presentation, I might get that call to help, to go check, to go see what's going on. And I've been very lucky to be respected by my community here in continuing to grow those skills, whether it's assisting doctors or just really gathering community to do some of this work. But yeah, there's different archetypes people embody, with skills acquisition. And some people just want to ignore that and think it's very dangerous. They don't want to learn anything about it because if they learn something about it, it might mean that they could do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have people who are doing it, but they're just bitter and they don't want to be in community with anybody else. And then you have somebody who's had bad outcomes or had a baby pass, and that too will affect somebody and how they see other people practicing, right? And so, how do we all begin to move towards building community around this work? And I do believe that's the work that is to be done, because learning breech is not just about breech, it's about shoulder dystocia. And learning breech isn't just about breech, it's about learning how to do some really good counseling skills. It's about nervous system work. It's about autonomy. And I think that's the other thing. There's such an acute need for people who want the autonomy to birth, that they desire competent care and people to show up for them in their ceremony, and they deserve it. Right? And how do we do that amidst some of the struggles with government regulation, with doctors who don't believe that anybody should be doing breech, even doctors, And so it's a big thing. Yeah, the right brain system, but it's also the unconscious aspects of breech that have filtered down through generations of obstetrical manipulation, trying to control breech, when it's not like this animal you can pin down onto its back, right?
And fear of it as well. Yeah.
And fear. And also realizing that breech is 11% of the cesareans in the United States. Might only be 4 to 5% of people, but it's 11% of the cesarean births. And so really acknowledging those situations.
Absolutely. For your own practice, do you have any boundaries or expectations when considering care for a woman with a breech baby?
Isn't it the same as with any family you're going to show up for, really? Breech is just a little bit more because of the social situation and the cultural hold, right? It's more like, is this family the right family to show up for? Because the thing is, it's not just about the consent and them deserving to have someone show up. It's about consent is relationship. And so how do we learn to come into relationship with another person? And one of the drawbacks of breech a lot of the time, and I've heard this from colleagues of mine, like or doctors I've worked with, is the late to care. Is the last minute, especially for midwives, right? Like so much of what I do is about relationship building so that we trust each other when it comes down to the birth. And a lot of breech people aren't seeking out new providers till the last minute. So that's a big challenge. And that means that things can fall through the cracks in a different way than if somebody had been in your care all along, that you don't know each other in the same way. And so who is the right person? And I know that this question was meant to be medical, like who gets risked out or who doesn't. And I could find something on your list of things that could be risking someone out, like high blood pressure, or preeclampsia, but specifically to breech, like what is going on with this baby? And the truth is, everybody says, oh, breech is a variation of normal. And I don't necessarily believe that. I think that breech is a variation of birth. And like having that respect. The first time I remember a conversation of breech, I was 23 years old, maybe 22. And my midwife, Vinnie Parvati Baker, and she was a midwife up here. And they were these two midwives were in the living room talking about breech. And they were talking about it with respect. It wasn't just like no big deal. And it wasn't ideology of perfection. There was some respect with it. And I don't know why that stuck with me, because I wasn't a midwife at the time. I was just 22 years old and had a long labor at my midwife's house and gave birth. Yeah. So I'm not sure that was a roundabout answer about who's the right person. And, there's risks of certain things that could happen, because the truth of breech is that some babies are breech because of neurological issues, lack of tone, connective tissue disorders of themselves or of their mother or their parent, right? There's things that could be going on. But if we start from the lens of validation and wisdom for this baby, that this baby has inside information, then we can see it differently instead of dwelling on, oh, is this baby one of the babies who has something going on? Did it just miss a chance to turn? And the truth is that there's always something on the list that we could potentially risk out for, but those are the most important. What is this person's internal locus of control? How do they take responsibility for their birth? And is this somebody I want to show up for and be in relationship with? It's not about risking them out. It's about me knowing that this is a birth that I'm willing to walk into. It's not about they don't meet my mark.
You've made a great point, and I can acknowledge and feel into that. Like, it's an intuitive, there's more to it than just that clinical perception and picture. It is a connection. Do I connect with this woman? Does she take full responsibility for her birth? Is she willing to do the work that you've got to do to achieve a vaginal
And
breech?
people are typically coming to a midwife to look at the clinical aspects of things too, right?
Yeah.
Which is, we can look at growth and we can look at other markers.
Yeah. Beautifully answered. Thank you. My next question is from one of the listeners. What exercises would you recommend during pregnancy to help baby to be in an optimal breech position? So she's added that there's plenty of exercise examples for cephalic babies to ensure they are in optimal position, so flexed, occiput anterior, but nothing on helping a breech baby into the best breech position.
Yeah, all of these similar things are about aligning the uterus, right? And so if you come from a more spinning babies background oriented belief system, or one of the resources for this would be the Breech Release, it's on Audible out there somewhere. It's a book that we wrote, and it really talks about how sometimes like the body work and the balancing and the nervous system, so it's like biomechanical, but it's also biodynamic. This work is for what? For babies to make space so babies can turn. It's for pre-external cephalic version. It's for post-external cephalic version. It's for a better cesarean birth. And it's also for a vaginal breech birth. So the reasons that a baby might be in a breech position is there could be less space in that lower uterine segment. But what if that reason that this baby was breech is also something that might interfere with the birth process? As I work with people who are breech, I find a lot of people have pain in pregnancy. They've been dancers with left knee injuries, or they have surgeries with scar tissue. They have a lot of emotional stress, a car accident. And how do we help with that balancing, not just of the body, but also of the heart, right? And also see that these things of imbalance can lead to less space for the baby to go head down, descend, breech, be able to find its own freedom to come down. So I think it's a good question, but it's really no different, except for the fact that depending on who you talk to, people hate talking about optimal fetal positioning. I mean, I'm like, well, what's that, right? But typically, if you talk to midwives, they'll say that the right side, whether it's ROT, ROP, ROA, RST, RSP, RSA, on that side, you have that baby over there. And sorry, my baby's got some.
I was going to say, your baby's looking very sad. Needs some stitching.
Yeah, it's been through a few hundred shoulder dystocias.
Yeah.
But, that would be on that right side
Mm-hmm.
because the uterus is more steep on the right and more curved on the left due to right obliquity of the uterus or due to anatomical reasons. And so especially for a frank breech baby, not as much for a complete babies are more likely to be on the left, but you have this steepness and that baby's able to angle into the uterus better on the right. So for a head down baby, we have that curvature, which allows that baby's head to flex on the left. And so babies come on down on the right too, by the way, and they come down on the left breech, by the way. You just might have different challenges as the baby threads through or meets the pelvic floor muscle complex. So balance for everybody. That's what I have to say. And yes, there are exercises and things you can do, and they're typically overlapping with freeing your psoas, the suppleness, the range of motion, sideline release for pelvic floor, so that you don't have one side that's tighter and one side that's looser, but that it's got the suppleness, and freeing the sacrotuberous ligament, general stretching, full range of motion. Those are just some of the things, but there's definitely things out there. And then, of course, there's things to also do to help a baby rotate and go head down. But I think a lot of them would be about also helping that baby disengage who might be engaged in breech as well. I hope that helps.
That's good. Thank you. It's given me more questions, but I'll hold off. What are optimal birthing positions for birthing a breech baby and why? So this was from a listener as well. She said, my first breech, I was on the bed. It was not that great.
Well, technically, in a medical model, you have research now that shows that when someone is in their hands and knees position, you have a 60% reduction of maneuvers. The truth is, we don't have studies on maternal positioning in other places. And what I find is that people teach me in birth by moving. I know by the positions that they're choosing, unless they saw it on TV and YouTube or Instagram, right? That they're supposed to be in hands and knees. And so they're getting in hands and knees. Or we've talked about something, or their friend birthed a certain way, breech. Like, sometimes people choose things from here. But what we know is they move into positions, and people call it intuitive positions, but it's really sensational positions. They have this sensation, they move their leg up, they stand up. And I think that part of the challenge of today is how do we allow the space so that people can have the freedom to move as necessary.
Yeah.
And so for me, the ideal position, I'm not a big water birth breech person, so there you go. I know that there are people who are, and would I get somebody out of the water and interrupt them and the nervous system emergence? Probably not. you know, because the truth is that I feel confident helping a baby, even if it's not the perfect place. But I also want to just validate providers and midwives and doctors because their nervous system is grounding the room. They're the anchor for this ceremonial space, right? And if they're flipping out because they can't orient to what they need to feel comfortable, then they may not be as safe to help. So I want to just acknowledge that some people have certain positions that they've learned in. And I certainly have learned to look for the reassuring signs of breech birth more on one side of a baby, the front of the baby, right, which is usually tum to bum, more than the back. But if we stop and look at the back, we start learning new things that we're not paying attention to because we can slip into the possibility of hands and knees being the new supine, right? So just really honoring the fact that we still have so much to learn in various positions, and from those positions that we see, we can say, look what they're doing with their leg. That's telling me where the pressure is of the baby inside. Not all the time, but we put together that information.
Another question from a listener. Baby's hip hitting the pelvis. Do they need help or can they move on their own? I guess they're thinking more of that oblique sitting in the uterus.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the overlapping legs more than the overlapping bum. And when I was in labor with my baby, I laid face down on the bed and shoved pillows up underneath my belly. It's not a maneuver, by the way, but I face down and her legs went flip and down she came in the pelvis.
You did that while in labor?
Yeah, it just felt good. And then I started, spontaneously having the urge to push, right? And so I know that this question is about the butt being stuck in the hips, and that could happen with this oblique, right? But I don't think it's a bad thing to do abdominal lift and tuck for engagement of that baby. But I think that sometimes it's this overlapping area here where it's like you just happen to have those frank legs kind of over there, or complete feet that are kind of crossed. And I think that's probably the best I can give you right there
Yeah.
for that question.
Pillows on the bed or abdo lift and tuck.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever told anyone to lay face down on the bed and shove your pillows under your belly.
Coming from a breech mama to breech mamas.
Yeah, that's the breech mom part of me.
Yeah. Next question from a listener. Have you had any experience with fibromatosis coli, also known as sternocleidomastoid tumor, in breech newborns? And if so, how was this managed? Is there a way to avoid this? Could you explain this? Why does it occur in breech babies? So this lady said getting someone to talk about it as a possibility to happen to breech babies is what she's asking, because it was very shocking for her when they saw a lump on their daughter's neck.
Yeah, I have not had experience with this and I do not know about it. But when we have breech, there's sometimes the reasons for it, right? And sometimes it's which came first, the chicken or the egg, for whatever's going on. And, I don't have much more information than that.
Yeah, that's fun. From your experience, is prolonged rupture of membrane more common in breech presentations? That's also from a listener.
I do see water release before the baby comes. I'm not sure it's prolonged, so I don't have statistics over the length, but I do see, it's kind of like those posterior babies. A lot of times posterior babies will have the water release before going into labor, and then you might have some irregular contraction patterns. And with breech, you might have an irregular or really intense contraction pattern that slows down, and then there's that lull or that rest, and then it begins in a building one as the baby engages and coming down deeper. I see that. I don't have statistics on it.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. I always wonder, are their little feet just poking the sac, or what's going on?
Yeah, but it's also with Frank.
Yes, that's right.
I think it's just the way the pressure is or isn't with contraction starting, and also the water pressure itself for it to break. So.
Yeah. Another question. So I've interviewed a few women with bicornuate uteruses who've had multiple breech babies. And this is definitely something I'm quite interested in as well, but I've had some questions from those listeners. Do you have any experience yourself supporting women with a known bicornuate uterus? And if so, what have you observed? What should these women be aware of if choosing a vaginal breech birth?
The interesting thing is I don't know for breech. For head down, I have helped somebody, and I know other people who've helped people with bicornuate uteruses and breech. With the head down baby, she had some early babies come, but also was really fast. I'll also add for the births that I attended. I work more with bicornuate uteruses with Bodywork. And so with helping babies rotate, some people will come to me earlier than later for Bodywork. So we're talking like 28 weeks, 29 weeks. And it's not so much to turn the baby, it's for balance before the baby doesn't have room to turn. And so bicornuate uteruses, the thing that we have to be careful with is that it has a large spectrum. And so some bicornuate uteruses, babies need to turn by 29, 30 weeks. That maybe there's a septum, or maybe it's bicornuate and it's just more profound. And others, there's more space, and those babies can turn at 37 weeks. And so we don't want to get into an ideology about this, but at the same time, the truth is there's less space. I remember someone came to me for Bodywork before I had as many tools as I have now, right? And she came in and she's like, okay, she called one side of her uterus the house and one side of her uterus the garage. And she'd already had a vaginal birth where the baby was head down in the house.
Okay.
Right? And this baby was breech in her garage, as she called it, right?
I love that.
And she thought, all we have to do is have this baby back up into the other part of the uterus. And I was like, okay. And guess what happened? It totally happened.
Wow.
And I was like, how did you know that this would work? It's like we did the balancing, we did the work, and it's like baby was able to be freed, and she just
So it mustn't have been all the way down. There was room for baby to...
It wasn't all the way down, but that baby literally had to come all the way down and up, right?
Wow.
But she knew what she needed. As I said, there's such a wide range of how that can play out. And I know people talk about worries about incoordinate contractions, and I haven't heard that to be the
No,
case.
I haven't read anything like that in the research. It tends to be very focused on increased risk of miscarriage and preterm, but once you get to term, there's some other things like, which I find interesting, they've labelled like preeclampsia and stuff, but I do wonder what other factors are going on there because I don't understand that. But otherwise, it's mainly the fact that you probably have a breech baby. So once you get to term, then it seems to be quite straightforward. It's just a matter of finding a care provider that will support for a breech if it is breech. I find that very interesting around the Bodywork about making more space. That's really helpful information for women with a bicornuate uterus and understanding that that could be supportive and helpful. You mentioned before about the baby just in positioning how around the shape of the uterus and tends being on the right side. That's made me curious around a woman who might have a baby in the left horn of her uterus.
Now we're in a whole different paradigm.
Yeah.
And I love to come from this place of validation, like not to say that there wouldn't be challenges, but how did this baby know that this was the right place to be? And I also want to say that I think babies sometimes have just missed opportunities. Some babies are ready to be head down or want to be head down. And then there's some that it's like, and it's not just like trying to force the baby. The baby won't be forced out of that position or doesn't easily turn, but there's just a sense.
Last question that I've got for you, another one from a listener. Is there a difference noticed in primitive reflex activation in breeches as opposed to cephalic babies born vaginally? So this lady has said, I found research on reflex differences comparing vaginal babies to C-section babies, but nothing about breech. My son was born breech vaginally and he was basically in a fight or flight mode for the first 8 weeks of his life. Hands in fists, bulging eyes, shaking and extreme colic. He received chiro, craniosacral and physical therapies which helped immensely. I am curious if this could be related to going through the birth canal breech instead of head first.
I have observed that as well. And I think that it's coming from various directions. But I just want to say the fetal reflexes for certain babies, as I said, there's like some tone issues going on that is one of the constellation points of breech. And so we can't really compare cephalic babies to breech babies. We have to do breech to breech because I think you're going to find those fetal reflexes to be similar for cesarean as well as vaginal. I don't think it's the vaginal birth that changes those reflexes. And at the same time, I have seen plenty of babies have more of an alertness to them, which potentially led to their being in that position. Now, also, I just want to say that as breech is, in this cultural hold of more stress, how does that stress factor play into the maternal positioning, mirror neurons of fetal positioning, and that right side of the uterus, of course, becomes like more steep and more the legs, the shoulders back. But I also want to say that the beauty of vaginal breech birth is you see the fetal reflexes as part of the baby helping themselves out in their descent. And so some of those reflexes are happening, whether it be what they now call the tummy crunch, or whether it's, one arm moves as the other leg, the opposite diagonal leg moves. There's these reflexes that happen where the baby's finding the space and we see it. And we know that happens with head down babies. We just don't see it with our own eyes, right?
Yeah.
And there's not as much space for that baby to drop into and explore. But yeah, this is where, we can say that so many babies are different in how they come out with that alertness, that overstimulation. And sometimes it could have to do with the birth itself. If there is rigorous need for resuscitation or help bringing the baby out. And I just want to congratulate the listener on finding the path to restoration of the craniosacral, of caretaking the nervous system, found that to be quite effective as well, even in compressing the baby from the sacrum to the top of the head and just kind of holding baby there. And that babies begin to soften and not be as attentive. They can become more vulnerable.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. So if you are comfortable, I would love to hear your breech birth story.
I can say it's probably an uneventful birth story.
Great. Do you want to give us a bit of because it's not your only child, is it?
No, this is so I'll set it up. So
Yeah.
she's my third baby. So this also, plays into it. My first baby was a 55-hour home birth with 8 hours of pushing and probably a baby that was posterior and had to rotate. And I had hip pain really badly and my hips seized. And that was my hardest part of my birth was my hips. It also took me a while to let go and finally decided I could die. That helped. And he was born, right? And I was 22. So, it was kind of like I've had a full life. Let's just let go. But then I had another baby who was 12 hours. And it was really straightforward. And come my third baby, it was 8 years later. I was 33 now, and I knew she was breech. Well, what happened is I was in pain in the middle of my pregnancy, and I see this pattern sometimes. This is where it's like, well, is it imbalance bringing this baby breech? Because my hips were hurting. Here we are, back to the hips, right? But I was 25 weeks pregnant, and I could barely walk, and she went breech, and I was just fine. I didn't have any more pain, and that was it. And I knew she was breech from 28 weeks on. And I was starting to catch babies as a midwifery student. And I'd be like, oh, you want to feel a breech baby to some of my other students? And they're like, not really, not interested for whatever reason. And because I had come into home birth in the 90s and breech was in the crazy pile with home birth, it really wasn't as differentiated to me. I didn't have a hard time making a decision over what I would do. My second birth was my midwife had gone to prison in my pregnancy. And so, just an aside.
Yeah.
But was attended by friends because that had it was a complicated pregnancy with other things, but it was a very straightforward birth. And so I'd kind of come from this more radical view of birth. And so for me, making a decision to have a breech birth was pretty straightforward. But come the end of pregnancy, I was like, this is a little inconvenient. So I had a friend, I was like, hey, maybe we should just turn her, just make it easy. So a friend of mine's like, oh yeah, let's try it. And so we did. And her heart rate went down into the 80s. And I said, I'm done. I'm just going to have this baby. And there was just this clarity about what she needed. And, and it's interesting because it was only like a couple days where this was in my body of like, oh, maybe this isn't the best thing. And then I have to say that my husband was way more confident than I was. I was starting to catch babies. And so I had been a little humbled by birth since my last birth. And so that made it so much easier to have somebody who was fully on board. And really what happened is when it came to it, I wasn't completely sure who'd be at my birth. I had various midwives who had said that they would help me because they knew that I was going to show up in my autonomy and responsible. But the midwife I was training under, I did invite her when I started to feel more pushy. I wanted her to feel included. I had a few other friends who came, and this story of this birth starts with my water releasing. And that was the first time that happened. See, now we're just going to tell the same story we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
So my water released and my contractions were back to back, but short. And I was having a hard time. I was like, wow, this is going fast. Called a friend to come and they spaced out eventually. My 8-year-old had woken up and she was needing some attention. So I kind of felt like that time was just for her. Because she got this attention and then we all went to bed. And I slept for some time. And then I woke up the next morning and the contractions were about 30 minutes apart. And then they just got closer and longer and stronger together throughout the day. I am no poster girl for laboring. I don't do it beautifully. I'm not, it's not easy for me, but I can walk into that fire. And it was just like birth. It was just a labor. It wasn't any different than my head down babies at that point. And walked around the block.
How many weeks were you?
This is the first time my baby came early. So she was about 39 weeks. So my others were like 40 and 1, it was not that much difference, but it was still earlier. And eventually it got time for me to really get down to work. And I laid down on the bed because I had this pain in the front. And it felt good to put pressure on it. So I just kept pushing those pillows and then her legs flipped up. I just know that's what happened. And she just slid in and I could feel that pressure. So, called different people to come be there. And we had a tent in the backyard where my daughter and all the neighborhood kids were playing. And I had an 11-year-old who was present. And I was always joking because my friends were there, were midwifery students or doulas, doula. And I was like, oh, I've got like $3,500 worth of doulas on my hips. And it's the son who comes up with the idea of putting some ice on my hips. And that helped. And so really it was just a long day. And so it came down to the fact that I began to push spontaneously. And I was lying on my side pushing and it was uncomfortable. And I'd go to the other side and it was uncomfortable. And my friend, said the same thing I'd said to other people, which is, Nicole, all your babies came with you being upright and you just got to go through it. And she was right. And I knew it. And
It was like that avoidance. You know what you need to do, but it's like, oh, I don't want to do that yet.
yeah. And as a midwife, when I'm with people like that, it's such a delicious, it's such a wonder. I mean, there's just something special about that, like that you can make that decision to
Yeah.
walk into it.
Yeah.
And so I did. And once I was upright, sure enough, right? She began, to come down. And my husband said she looked like a burrito with a lot of sauce coming out, right? Because she was Frank Breech. And so she began to descend. And what was really interesting is as she was coming out, I thought, oh my gosh, someone's shaking my baby. Like, what's going on? And I looked down there and nobody's touching her. She's rocking herself back and forth. And so it's rock, rock, rock. And then the contraction would come. And I would have this urge to push. And I was push and flop came down the legs, right? And I'd have this release and then rock, 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 rock. And she's moving again. And now her elbows come down and the contraction builds. And I pushed and, out came her elbows. And rock, 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 rock. And then out came her arms. And then I felt like I was done. But I wasn't, of course, right?
Yeah.
And so at this point, somebody had told my husband, catch her, be sure to grab her, right? And hold on to her. And so he had her and it shifted position a bit, but he's kind of just holding on to her a little bit, right? So she doesn't fall to the floor. And luckily, he's kind of like this in general, which is kind of like, well, this isn't going anywhere. So he let her go. And she was already starting to lose tone in pictures, but I didn't know that at the time. What the beauty of that is at that moment, her feet hit the ground, touched the ground, and she came up into this full tummy crunch, which we didn't, back then there wasn't a thing. Nobody named that, at least in my world, and hadn't been published that there was a tummy crunch. And so we just thought, her little fists that she was pretty badass. And we wouldn't have necessarily known how to help her, but she was able to rotate her head and flex and be born. So that's the story of Nelia Marie. And after that, we went to I laid down on the floor and held her. And I do remember one other thing is like right before her legs had flopped out. People were like, reach down and touch her. And I was like, I can. I'm up in the ceiling, right? I'm not in my body. I'm like right above it. And it's like, if I'm going to touch her, I have to come back down into my body in a different way. Yeah, you can tell that her birth made a mark on me.
I was just resonating with what you just said about being up in the ceiling. I've not heard that explanation. I was the same with my birth. It's very much up here. There was no trying to connect with them when they're halfway out. It was just, no, I just have to do this first and then I can do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Incredible. And did she come straight up so your husband caught her up to your chest? Did she cry? Like, because you said her tone was coming down a bit, but she was all right.
I don't remember. And although there was midwives there, nobody was charting.
Yeah.
And all I remember is knowing she was okay. And remember going, like welcoming her. Like, hello, I've been waiting for you.
Yeah.
And then getting in a really hot bathtub to have the placenta, which is probably not what most midwives would suggest to do. But I was so cold after my birth. I just wanted it to be warm. And it just turned into nighttime. She was born around 9 p.m. at night. So, and so it just gotten cold suddenly and I just wanted to be warm. But, I came away from this really thinking about how do I help people have the births that they want. I can help people, but all I could do is witness them, right? Which, by the way, can be a lot. So it took me some time after I finished, I took a year off, a year and a half off, minus a couple births like 2 weeks later. But I took a year and a half off, and eventually I started to look up conferences, workshops, and that workshop where I met Gail Tully. One of the things that also happened to me in my career is I was really blessed to go to Mexico for a conference, and Doña Emila gifted me a rebozo.
Mhm.
And so this was in the early 2000s, and the rebozo taught me. I mean, I learned a little there, but I was really naive and came back with a few things. But the rebozo continued to teach me about movement and positioning, and some of it was very magical thinking. It's not a bad thing, but it made me question things differently. And so when I was at this breech workshop, the doctor was talking about how we don't want babies to rotate posterior for breech. And so my question was, how do we prevent that from happening? Which nobody really had an answer for, but that question is why I ended up being invited to become a spinning babies trainer, because I was starting to think about birth from a different paradigm. I don't think I got that at the point. I was just, I haven't been one of those midwives who've said, this is what I want to be. It's like midwifery kind of dragged me along, and I was like, oh, this is where I'm going. So it was pretty organic. It still is, even though now I'm balancing teaching breech. I'm teaching shoulder dystocia, doing some integration of storytelling, like fairy tale storytelling with those classes too. And then also still attending births and just loving it.
That's good. Gotta love it.
Yeah. Yeah, especially this work. So my baby's now 20, and she still does things her own way. And she still puts her head up to my heart to comfort me.
Yeah, that's cute. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Any last words of wisdom or advice that you'd like to share with anyone listening?
Presence over ideology. Stay curious, stay present. Ideology is always, it's a trap. It's how we learn.
Perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're doing this work, right? Because I really do believe that breech is one of the ways we can change birth. And, it's not idealizing breech or demonizing breech. It's really about the struggle and the resiliency connected to it. So parents talking.
Yeah. And sharing and learning from each other.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
The Breech Birth podcast is independently created and produced. If you'd like to support the continuation of this space, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps keep these stories being shared and accessible to women and families around the world, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Breech Birth podcast. These stories matter. They stretch what we think we know and bring voice to experiences that need to be heard. I'm so grateful to our guests who have shared their experiences with us, raw, real, and full of wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and share with others. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Breech Birth Podcast. And if you have a breech story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may we continue to reclaim the narrative, one story at a time.